Corruption runs deep. Lies control the courtroom, and a desperate mother is about to lose everything until a single truth shatters the entire system. When the judge takes the stand, no one sees it coming, and what happens next will change her life forever. Monica Brooks sat in the cold, sterile courtroom, her hands gripping the table as she glanced at her 7-year-old daughter, Ava, seated in the back. Monica had fought through years of struggle, working tirelessly to provide a stable and loving home for Ava after her bitter divorce. But now she faced her biggest battle yet, a custody fight against her wealthy, manipulative ex-husband, Greg Thompson. At the judge's bench sat Judge Raymond Collins, a man known for his strong influence in the legal world, but also for his subtle yet firm biases. He had a reputation for favoring the rich and powerful, and today was no different. His eyes barely met Monica's as he leaned toward Greg, exchanging pleasantries before turning his attention to the case. Beside Monica, David Sinclair, her lawyer, adjusted his tie and prepared his case. David was known for exposing corruption, and he could already sense the unfairness brewing in the room. Monica had everything a good mother should: a secure home, a steady income, a history of being Ava's primary caregiver. Yet every time David presented evidence in her favor, Judge Collins brushed it aside, his expression unreadable, his decisions already feeling predetermined. Greg sat smugly on the other side, confidence oozing from his every move. He knew the game was rigged in his favor, and Monica could feel it too. But what no one in that courtroom knew was that David had already started digging into Collins' past, determined to uncover what lay beneath the surface of his unjust rulings. This wasn't just a custody case anymore. It was a fight against corruption, power, and prejudice. And Monica was about to find out just how deep this battle would go. Monica's stomach twisted in knots as she sat at the plaintiff's table, her fingers curled into fists beneath the desk. Every time her lawyer, David Sinclair, spoke, Judge Raymond Collins cut him off with sharp interjections, dismissing key evidence without so much as a glance at the documents in front of him. From across the room, Greg Thompson, her smug ex-husband, watched with barely concealed amusement, leaning back in his chair with confidence. He knew how this was going to go. The judge was already in his pocket, and Monica didn't stand a chance. David, ever persistent, laid out Monica's case with precision. He handed over financial records, proving that Monica was more than capable of providing for Ava's needs. He displayed pictures of her home, a warm, stable environment where Ava thrived. He even called up character witnesses, including Ava's teachers and pediatrician, all of whom testified to Monica's loving and attentive parenting. Still, Judge Collins barely looked at the files before dismissing them. He waved off the witnesses with an air of indifference, leaning back in his chair. Miss Brooks may have a stable job, but raising a child requires far more than just financial independence, he mused, adjusting his glasses. His tone dripped with condescension. I don't doubt she cares for the child, but given the resources that Mr. Thompson can provide, well, one must think about what is truly best for Ava. Monica's heart pounded in anger. The words cut deep. It wasn't about what was best for Ava. It was about power, money, and privilege. Greg hid his smirk behind a well-practiced expression of fatherly concern. He wasn't worried at all. David, however, was watching Collins carefully. There was something more than just bias at play here. This wasn't incompetence. It was intentional. As the judge continued to tilt the case in Greg's favor, David leaned over to Monica and whispered, "Something's off. He's not just biased, he's covering something up." Monica shot him a desperate look, but David's mind was already racing. Why was Collins so determined to rule in Greg's favor? As the proceedings continued, David made a silent vow to find out. If Judge Collins thought he could twist the law to serve the powerful, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. David Sinclair knew something was off. Judge Collins had ignored every strong argument and piece of evidence in Monica's favor. He had cut her off, dismissed character witnesses, and treated Greg with undeserved deference. There was something deeper at play, and David was determined to expose it. As Monica sat in silent frustration at the defendant's table, David subtly pulled out his phone and sent a text to his legal assistant, Claire. Dig into Judge Collins. Rulings, financials, connections to Greg. There's something here. He slipped his phone away before anyone noticed. The judge called for a short recess, giving David time to huddle with Monica outside the courtroom. "This isn't just bias," he whispered urgently. "I think Collins is compromised." Monica's heart pounded. "What do you mean? Bribed?" "I can't prove it yet, but Claire is looking into it now. Stay strong in there. We're not done." Inside, Greg leaned against a bench, smirking confidently as his high-powered lawyer whispered something in his ear. He wasn't even worried. He thought the outcome was already sealed. Minutes later, the trial resumed. David stood up and approached the bench. "Your Honor, I'd like to revisit some key financial documents regarding Monica's ability to provide for Ava." Collins sighed dramatically, waving a dismissive hand. "Counselor, we've already established that Mr. Thompson has a more substantial financial background." David pressed on. "But isn't it also true that stability is more than just money? Monica has been Ava's primary caregiver since birth. She has a steady income, a safe home, and—" Collins cut him off. "I think we've covered this." David clenched his jaw. He needed more time. Just then, Claire burst into the back of the courtroom, locking eyes with David and nodding slightly. She had something. David exhaled, thinking quickly. He couldn't outright accuse Collins without solid proof in front of the court. He needed to lead him into a trap. "Your Honor," David said, pacing slowly, "I'd like to ask Mr. Thompson a few more questions." Greg's lawyer objected. "We've already provided everything necessary." David smiled. "Indulge me." Collins exhaled impatiently. "Proceed." David turned to Greg. "Mr. Thompson, you have substantial financial assets, correct?" Greg smirked. "That's correct." "You've also donated generously to several organizations over the years." Greg sat up straighter, nodding. "Yes, I believe in giving back." David stepped closer. "Including to a certain family court foundation? One closely linked to this courtroom?" The room fell silent. Greg's expression faltered for the first time. Judge Collins shifted in his seat. "Counselor, I fail to see the relevance." David held up a file Claire had handed him. "Your Honor, I have financial records showing that Greg Thompson has made undisclosed contributions to an organization that, interestingly, has direct ties to you." A murmur rippled through the room. Collins's face darkened. "This is ridiculous," Greg's lawyer snapped. "Objection! Relevance!" David turned to Collins. "That's a great question, Your Honor. Maybe you'd like to clarify exactly what your relationship is with Greg Thompson outside this courtroom?" Collins' face hardened. "Mr. Sinclair, you are dangerously close to contempt." David took a slow breath. "I understand, Your Honor, but before you dismiss me, I'd like to submit an official motion for a judicial review regarding potential conflicts of interest in this case." Gas spread across the courtroom. Even the bailiff looked stunned. Collins's jaw clenched. "That is completely unnecessary." David held firm. "Then you wouldn't mind explaining why these records show direct financial links between you and Mr. Thompson's network?" Greg was growing visibly nervous now. He turned to his lawyer, whispering furiously. Collins' gavel slammed down. "We are taking a recess." But it was too late. The damage was done. The truth was out. Outside the courtroom, Claire handed David a new document. "We just confirmed Collins has ruled in Greg's favor in 7 similar cases, all against black mothers, and every single father involved was in his business circle." David's blood boiled. "We have him." Back inside, Collins returned, looking tense but composed. He was trying to hold on to control, but the whispers in the courtroom told David that people were starting to see the cracks. David turned to Monica. "We're about to win this." Monica's eyes welled with hope. "Are you sure?" David nodded. "Now watch." As court resumed, David stood tall. "Your Honor, I respectfully request that this case be immediately reviewed by an independent judge." Collins's face turned red. "Denied." David expected that. "Then I'll be filing a formal complaint with the Judicial Ethics Board regarding financial misconduct." The courtroom erupted in gasps. Collins' grip on his gavel tightened. Greg finally lost his composure. "Damn it, Ray, just end this now!" The words slipped before he could stop them. Collins' eyes widened in horror. It was over. The bailiff stepped forward, looking at Collins expectantly. The room had fallen into dead silence. Collins exhaled sharply, gripping the bench. "After reconsideration, I will recuse myself from this case." Monica gasped, covering her mouth. The impossible had happened. David took a victorious breath. And given the circumstances, I request an immediate ruling for custody to be granted to Ms. Brooks. Collins hesitated, but with the entire courtroom watching, he knew he was finished. He cleared his throat. The motion is granted. Monica broke into tears. She had won. Greg stormed out, but no one cared. This moment was Monica's. David turned to her with a proud smile. You did it. She shook her head, wiping her eyes. We did. As they exited the courtroom, cameras flashed. Reporters were waiting, having caught wind of the corruption scandal. Collins knew his career was over. David put his hand on Monica's shoulder. Ready to tell your story? Monica nodded, holding Ava's hand tightly. More than ever. Climax, 1,200 words. Section of your story. David stood up, his expression sharp and unyielding as he held up a thick file of documents. Your Honor, I have undeniable proof that this case has been compromised. His voice echoed through the tense courtroom, making every spectator lean in. Judge Collins narrowed his eyes, his usual arrogant demeanor shifting slightly. Watch yourself, Mr. Sinclair. Baseless accusations will not be tolerated in my courtroom. David smirked. Oh, I assure you, these are far from baseless. He walked confidently toward the bench, handing over a folder to the bailiff. These are financial records proving that you, Judge Collins, have been receiving undisclosed payments from third-party sources tied directly to my client's ex-husband, Greg Thompson. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Monica's heart pounded in her chest. She looked at Greg, whose confident smirk had disappeared. His face was ghostly pale. Judge Collins flipped through the papers, his hands shaking slightly. This is nonsense, he barked, but his voice cracked just enough to show weakness. David didn't let up. Is it? Because these records show multiple wire transfers leading to an offshore account in your name. And the sender? A company registered under Greg's legal team. Care to explain? The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Reporters scribbled frantically, some already sending texts to their newsrooms. Collins' grip on the papers tightened as his face flushed red. This is a violation of courtroom conduct, Collins barked, slamming his gavel. This is not how the judicial system works. David's eyes flashed. You're right, Your Honor. The judicial system is supposed to work fairly, which is why this entire case needs to be thrown out and investigated immediately. Monica gripped the edge of the table, hardly daring to believe what she was witnessing. After months of fighting a system stacked against her, the truth was finally coming to light. Greg shot up from his seat, his voice rising in desperation. This is ridiculous. Judge, don't let him... Sit down, Mr. Thompson, David interrupted coldly, his tone cutting through the tension like a blade. You're just as guilty in this as Judge Collins, and the world is about to see it. Judge Collins, for the first time, looked completely cornered. His eyes darted to the court reporters, the stenographer, the people in the room who would carry this scandal to the world. His career, his reputation, everything was crumbling before him. The door to the courtroom suddenly opened, and 2 Judicial Review Committee members stepped inside, followed by an ethics investigator. One of them, a composed yet authoritative woman, addressed the court. Judge Collins, she said, we have received a formal complaint regarding misconduct in your rulings. Due to the evidence provided today, we are placing you under immediate investigation. The courtroom erupted. Collins shot up from his seat, his face contorted with fury. You can't do this. I am a sitting judge. And now you're a sitting judge under suspension, the investigator replied coolly. Bailiff, please escort Judge Collins out of the courtroom. The bailiff hesitated. Even though it was his duty, Collins had always been a figure of power in this courthouse. But after another moment, he stepped forward. Collins snatched off his robe, tossing it onto his chair. His face burned with humiliation as he stormed past Monica, pausing just long enough to glare at her. This isn't over, he hissed under his breath. Monica didn't flinch. Yes, it is. Collins clenched his jaw but said nothing more as the bailiff led him out of the courtroom. The moment he disappeared through the doors, a stunned silence filled the room. Then in a moment Monica would never forget, The judicial review officer turned to face the courtroom. Given these developments, this case is now under review. For now, Judge Collins' ruling is null and void. Monica's breath hitched. The ruling, Greg's unfair advantage, was gone. Hope surged through her. Greg, realizing the weight of what just happened, turned to his lawyer in a panic. "Fix this," he hissed. But there was no fixing this. David straightened his suit, his voice steady. "Your Honor, with Judge Collins' bias and corruption exposed, it is only fair that this custody case be reassigned to a new judge. My client has been unjustly treated throughout these proceedings, and she deserves a fair hearing." The judicial review officer nodded. "This case will be reassigned immediately. Until then, temporary custody of Ava Brooks will remain with her mother." Monica's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. She had fought so hard, endured so much, and finally, the system was working in her favor. Greg slammed his fists on the table. "You can't do this!" The officer didn't even acknowledge him. "This court is adjourned." The gavel struck. Monica turned to David, overwhelmed with emotion. I don't even have words." David smiled, his confidence unwavering. "Justice has a way of finding its way to the right people. This fight isn't over, but we just won a battle that changes everything." Monica exhaled, looking toward the doors where Collins had exited. The power he held, the corruption that nearly took her daughter from her, was finally crumbling, and she was still standing. The courtroom, still buzzing with shock from Judge Collins' removal, fell into an eerie silence as a new judge took the bench. Judge Evelyn Parker, known for her impartiality and sharp legal mind, adjusted her glasses and took a deep breath before addressing the room. "This case will now be reviewed fairly," she stated firmly, glancing at both Monica and Greg. "We will base all decisions on evidence, not influence." Monica felt her heart race. For the first time, she had a real chance. Greg, however, sat stiffly in his seat, glaring at his lawyer, who looked equally unsettled. The safety net they had relied on, Collins' corrupt ruling, was gone. David wasted no time. With renewed determination, he stood and confidently presented the evidence that had been ignored before. He went over every detail: Monica's stable income, the safe and loving environment she had built for Ava, and the testimony from teachers and child development experts affirming Ava's bond with her mother. The courtroom listened intently, no longer under the shadow of Collins' prejudiced decisions. When Greg's turn came, his argument was weak at best. Without Collins to favor him, all he had left were vague claims and empty assertions of his right to custody. The new judge was unimpressed. "Mr. Thompson, do you have any credible evidence to suggest that Ava is unsafe or unhappy in her mother's care?" Judge Parker's voice was firm. Greg stammered. I mean, she'd have a better lifestyle with me." The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. "A child's well-being is not determined by wealth alone, Mr. Thompson." David leaned in, his voice razor-sharp. "And given the recent revelations about your unethical influence over Judge Collins, your credibility is severely compromised." Greg clenched his fists, his once arrogant demeanor fading. Judge Parker exhaled, reviewing the final pieces of testimony and the supporting documents. The courtroom was on edge as she finally looked up. "In the matter of Ava Brooks's custody," she announced, "I am granting full legal and physical custody to her mother, Monica Brooks." For a moment, time stood still. Then a wave of emotion surged through the room. Monica gasped, covering her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. The weight of every battle she had fought, every injustice she had endured, lifted in an instant. Gasps and murmurs spread throughout the courtroom. Monica's supporters, friends, teachers, and even strangers who had followed the case, erupted into quiet cheers and embraces. A few even shed tears of relief. Greg, on the other hand, was frozen, his face drained of all color. He opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. The judge's voice cut through the air. "Mr. Thompson, given the findings of this case, you will have limited supervised visitation pending further review. This decision is final." Greg's lawyer turned to him, whispering urgently, but Greg simply sat there stunned. The power, the connections, the influence, none of it could save him now. David turned to Monica, his voice low but steady. "You did it." Monica, still in disbelief, wiped her tears and let out a breathy laugh. "No, we did it." As the courtroom slowly emptied, reporters gathered outside, eager to get statements. The news of the judge's corruption and the shocking custody battle had spread far beyond the courthouse walls. David, who had been instrumental in exposing Collins, found himself thrust into the national spotlight. Legal analysts praised his sharp instincts and fearless approach, calling his handling of the case a landmark victory against corruption in the judiciary. Monica, still holding Ava's picture in her hands, stepped outside into the fresh air. For the first time in months, she felt free. Greg, meanwhile, was swarmed by reporters. His downfall had been swift, and there was no escaping the consequences. His once polished public image was shattered, his influence now meaningless. As he pushed past the cameras, one reporter's voice cut through the noise. "Mr. Thompson, do you regret your actions in this case?" Greg paused for a fraction of a second before storming away without a word. David and Monica watched from a distance. "He'll never admit it," David muttered. "He doesn't need to," Monica replied, standing taller than ever. We all saw the truth. As the courthouse doors closed behind them, Monica took a deep breath. She had won, not just the case, but her dignity, her daughter's future, and the justice she had long been denied. And that, she knew, was a victory no amount of wealth could buy. Outside the courthouse, Monica fell to her knees as Ava ran into her arms. Tears streamed down her face as she held her daughter tightly, finally free from the fear that had haunted her for months. "It's over, baby," she whispered, pressing a kiss against Ava's forehead. "Mommy's got you now." David stood a few steps away, watching the emotional reunion with quiet satisfaction. Despite the corruption, the injustice, and the battles they had faced, justice had finally prevailed. He had spent years fighting for people like Monica, people who had been silenced by power, ignored by the system. But this case had been different. It had been personal. And now, seeing the relief on Monica's face, he knew every late night and every moment of doubt had been worth it. The courthouse doors burst open as reporters swarmed, their cameras flashing, their microphones thrust forward. "Monica, how does it feel to finally win custody of your daughter?" "David, did you anticipate exposing a corruption scandal along with this case? What does this mean for the justice system moving forward?" Monica, still holding Ava, straightened her shoulders and met the cameras with newfound strength. "This case was never just about me. It was about every mother, every father, every person who's ever been silenced by a system that wasn't built for them. Today we proved that justice isn't about wealth or power, it's about truth." David nodded in agreement. "And now that Judge Collins has been removed, I can guarantee this investigation isn't over. We're going to uncover every case he's tainted and make sure justice is restored for every person he's wronged." The news of Collins' corruption spread like wildfire, prompting legal officials to dig deeper into his past rulings. Families who had lost unfair custody battles came forward, demanding their cases be reopened. For Monica, however, the fight was over. She had won. As she took Ava's hand, she looked back at David, gratitude shining in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," David smiled. "Live your life, Monica. That's thanks enough." Hand in hand, Monica and Ava walked away from the courthouse, away from the injustice, away from the pain. Together, they stepped into a future built on resilience, love, and a hard-fought victory that no one could ever take away.